This video is for the 6-panel cap. So the 6-panel cap consists of 3 pieces. You have a front panel, a back panel, and a side panel. What you will get is basically a hat pack that will look like this, pinned together. The front pieces will have 3 dots. The side piece will have 1 dot and 2 dot. The 1 dot goes to the front. The 2 dot goes to the back. I'll explain that a little bit later. So starting off, we're going to start off with sewing the front 2 panels. So the 3 dots go to the side, and you'll have basically the cap fabric, and then you will also have a pile of other fabrics that will be basically the backing of the front panels. So if you look at basically like this cap has the fabric that goes on the front, and then there'll be some sort of fabric that is like an interfacing or like a stabilizer fabric that goes on the back of the front panel of the cap. And that is what this stuff is. Generally it's a different fabric from the fabric that you're going to be used for the cap, but not always, but most of the time it is. And the backing fabric, you're going to want to face the front of the fabric towards the inside of the cap, so you'll see the nice fabric instead of this. So when you sew these, you're going to start with the front panel, and you're going to sew this here, the one without the dots. So you're going to sew those 2 pieces together. And actually, before you do any sewing at all, we're going to want to mark the seam, the line that you're going to follow for seam allowance. So the seam allowance for all the caps is 3/8. So 3/8 is going to be right at this. That's really hard to see on the video, but it's 1, 2. It's this guy here, this little third line there. So you're gonna mark on your sewing machine 3/8. And mine is already marked, but basically you mark it from where the needle is going to hit. So I just put my needle at 3/8 there, you put it down, and on my particular machine it's right before this little 1 line. So you take it and you'd put some sort of marking on there. Piece of tape works really well. I have a magnetic guide that I am including with the stuff that I'm giving you. It's going to look exactly like this. So you can mark with a piece of tape, and then in addition to that, so that your fabric stays within these guidelines, you can put your magnetic guide right on the edge of, look in the video you see a little bit of a reflection, but it's right on the edge of the tape there. So, and that's just a way to keep your fabric from going over. Like I said, the seam allowance on these caps is very important. If you go over your seam allowance, it makes the cap smaller. If you go under, it makes the cap larger. So if you're going to err on one side or the other, always err on the smaller side. So yeah, we're going to set our seam allowance. You're going to set your magnetic guide to where your fabric won't go any farther than that. And we're going to put our 2 front panels together. Some fabrics are specific to a front and a back. This particular stuff is not. The dots that are on here doesn't necessarily mean a front or a back. It just means a front face of a fabric or a back of a fabric. It just means that this particular side goes to another panel. It just indicates where it goes on the panel. So you're going to start with your 2 front panels here. For these caps, I always start with the bottom and sew towards the top. And you keep that, I try and keep that consistent throughout the cap, just so that when everything comes together, it's all pulling towards the top. I mean, I guess if it works better a different way, then you're more than welcome to do that. So I set my fabric right on the edge of the guide there. And you sew your two pieces together there, clip your strings, make sure everything's nice and tidy. So one thing that I like to do is with this top here, this little point here, I like to cut like a 45-degree angle, just cut the tip off, and that allows for as you put the cap together, this is going to be the very top of the cap, it reduces the bulk at the top of the cap there. So then you take your guide off and you're going to do your top stitch. Once again, I do my top stitching from the bottom up, but really that's not really all that big of a deal. And basically you just open these guys up there, and for me personally, basically you're between the two stitches on either side, it's going to be about 3/8 as well. I like to run with the top stitching having the seam here right in the middle of one of these two little forks. And when you do your top stitching, basically you're holding down the fabric that is underneath there, and making that just helps the cap itself lay flat. And you're also going to want to make sure that you catch all of the fabric underneath there. That's pretty important as well. Just make sure you catch all the fabric. So in some fabrics that are a little bit looser, you might have a little bit less of a distance here. So that's why I like to keep that foot right in the middle of here, because that kind of allows a little bit extra. It's a little bit of a safety thing, just so that you make sure you catch everything. But either way, you can go a little bit wider if you want. You can, just make sure that you catch both sides of the fabric on the caps. So one thing I forgot to do is I forgot to put my fabrics, the backings on. So in the beginning, what you'll do is what I was supposed to do was put these pieces of fabric together here, and then sew it all together. But what I'm going to do here is actually basically just make a second one and sew them together separately there. So once again, set the guide up, set it right at the edge of the tape. 3 dots indicates the side, so you're going to sew because this is going to be the front, you sew these two pieces together. Like I said, these were supposed to all be sewn together as one piece, but I didn't do it that way. So cut your little 45-degree angle there. I'm going to do the top stitching on this. Just make sure your fabrics are all split there down at the bottom. Make sure they go to either side. Once again, clip your edges here. Alright, and basically this would be the inside and the outside panel. Once again, generally you'd put these two pieces, this piece and this piece together, and this piece and this piece would be together, and then you'd do it like this and sew it, but I forgot to, so we're just going to roll with what we got. Yeah, and basically this is also a great indicator of what the front is kind of later on. So from here, I mean, if you want to do these two pieces separately and do it like that, that's fine. You just got to make sure that your edges are lined up when you sew from here on out. But like I said, normally I put all 4 of these pieces together and then sew them on top. So after you've got the front panel, the front pieces sewn together, you're going to sew the back pieces together. The back pieces have no markings because it's pretty self-explanatory. This is going to be the hole that's in the very back of the hat, so you're going to sew the very back of the hat together, and we're going to start with this edge here. Once again, I start at the bottom and go towards the top of the cap. So you're going to set your guide up for 3/8. That's why if you mark your sewing machine with a Sharpie, it tends to rub off. The piece of tape works really well, so you can use it over and over. So you start at the bottom, set your distance for your seam allowance. There we go. Clip your strings. Clip your top there. Alright, take your guide away. We're going to do top stitching now. So you open this bad boy up, fold those guys like that. Once again, just have that seam kind of in the middle of that foot. That always makes a good marker there. Clip your strings, make sure everything's all nice and clean. Alright, that looks pretty good. Then you can, from here, you can do the hem basically on the bottom here. Sorry the video is a little bit shaky. The tripod's resting on the sewing machine. So from here you fold that over just a little bit and kind of do that all the way along the bottom there. It's easier to do in this stage. You can do it at the end, but it's easier to do in this stage because you're working with only a small piece. Instead of having to fold over a bunch of fabric, you're only having to work with this little tiny piece there. So same thing there, that looks pretty good. I'm using 2 different color string, but generally you're going to want to match the top stitch color to the color of the fabric, or just do as best you can. Or it's really personal preference. If you think a different color looks good, like a contrasting color, then go ahead and use a contrasting color. So we have the back panel done. So now we're going to move on to the side panels. Like I said, the side panels, number 2 is going to be attached to the back panel. Number 1 is going to be attached to the front panel here. So we're going to take our 2 pieces there. Like I said, number 2 is going to be matched up to the back. So we match those guys like that. And for this particular portion, when I originally marked my sewing machine for the 3/8 here, I mark it on both sides. That allows me to sew kind of lefty there. So the 3/8 mark on my machine is this here, but once again you're going to want to take a ruler, put your needle down, and then mark 3/8 on both sides. Like I said, this allows you once again to go from the bottom to the top, and just keeps your fabric consistent. So I'd put my guide over on the 3/8 side over here, and you start from the bottom, line the bottoms of your fabric up. Alrighty, you can go all the way if you want. So same type of thing, clip your strings. You're also going to clip the same thing. Just give that guy a little bit of a clip there. Just gets rid of some of the excess fabric. And then you're going to do your top stitching. Fold this guy, that guy down. Make sure your fabrics are on either side. Alright, from there you have a relatively straight line here. It's not super straight, but it'll be alright. So now you have 3 pieces put together here. You have the 2 backs and then the 1 side panel. So for the front, you're going to do the opposite panel here. So I'm going to try and shed a little bit more light on this. Let's see. I have these 2 back panels, 1 side panel. So for the front, you're going to put the side panel over here. So once again, when you have your piece here, number 1 is going to go towards the front. So you match up your fabrics there. Once again, make sure this back piece, the edges are lined up there. Basically, you're doing like opposite panels so that when you put it all together, it will all be right. So it looks like we're going to be sewing lefty again on this side. So put your guide up. Make sure all your fabrics are all lined up there. Okay. Like I said in the beginning, generally these are already sewn together, so you're going to have minimal, they're not going to move around quite as much as they are here. But alright, set your fabric up there, set it up against the guide. I'm going to sew these pieces together here, kind of keeping everything all nice and tidy. Like I said, if you're going to err on one side or the other, try and err a little smaller rather than larger, but I mean, try and keep them as best you can. So we got these guys here, same thing, clip this little edge here. So I've already clipped that edge, so I'm just going to clip that little guy there. You take your guide away, we're going to top stitch. So as of now, I've top stitched everything. I will have top stitched everything. For me personally, when I do this piece, when you have this doubled up fabric and I do the top stitch, I'll do the top stitch on the doubled up side because it's a little bit harder. It's more likely to try and unfold on itself. So I do the top stitch on the hard side first, and that makes it easier coming back because the fabric's already going to want to be folded over by itself. Get these extra strings out of there. Alrighty, start on this other side. Oh, come on, guy. So this top stitch is not going to be perfectly straight because it's trying to wander off, but it'll be alright. Cut your excess strings. Once again, you'll have a relatively straight line here. It's definitely workable. So generally you're not going to want to have these extra little pieces in there, but overall it looks pretty good. So yeah, now you basically have your 3 pieces here. you have your side over here, you have your side over here, they're opposite pieces. So here comes the kind of tricky part, is so one thing that's really important for these caps is getting the front line, this is actually the back line, to match up with the front line here. So having these two pieces straight is pretty important there. So one thing that I've done in the past is to put a pin through them. So you can take a sewing pin. Take a sewing pin and you can put it through. Put it through the bottom here, and then put it through the top as well. You're going to put it through the top line here. It's a little harder to see on this one, but basically you'd put the two lines together. So this front line, you're going to match up with the back line. Put the two tops together there, and then put your pin through. Probably right about there would be good, and it's best if it goes through both of the middle of the seams. So it'd be like that. So it goes through the middle of this seam here, and it goes through the middle of this seam back there, and that's one way to kind of hold it in place to where the two pieces stay together. I guess you could let's see, I don't know, if there's a different way that you feel works best, then by all means do that. In the past I've also like tacked the top, just tacked that little top together. That has worked before. Really just kind of playing it by ear there. Let's see, I'm going to try something new, see if this works. Because you want it to move a little bit, but just not a lot. I'm actually just going to do what I've done in the past. So I'm going to tack these two tops together. So you line your two lines up there, that line, that line. Like I said, once again, it's the front and the back. Make sure the tops are level together. Let's see, double check those. I'm just going to put like a couple of stitches just in the very top here. And spacing doesn't really matter. I just want to make sure that those stay together. Okay. Clip all this excess. Just clip this little excess there. Alright, so the same thing goes. You're going to set up your 3/8 guide there, right on the edge of the tape. So these two pieces are kind of tacked together now, at least temporarily holding each other. You're going to line up your surfaces there, the edges. So like I said, the 2 goes to the back side, so we're already set up there. Set your fabric right up against the 3/8 and try and make sure that the edges stay pretty close to together. And like I said, this top part was a relatively straight line, so there's going to be a little bit of give and take in there. But once again, try and like compensate a little bit for that. There's a little bit less on this side, a little bit more on that side. So you're going to get to the top here. You're going to keep, like I said, just keep your fabrics all together there. But this part is probably the most tricky part of the whole process there. So, and if you've done it correctly, your 2 bottoms should be perfectly aligned, if not very, very close. Alright, so our hat is finally together. So, clipping all that excess stuff, like I said, just make sure the bulk is minimal. So now we're going to do our one big top stitch across the across this piece that we just created, the crown that we just created. Let's go. So same thing. By now you should be pretty good at top stitching. The same thing applies if you wanted. It's always good to do the side that has more bulk, just so that it's easier on the way back. This top stitch is probably going to be the most difficult as well, just because there's more fabric that you're handling. So this top piece is always going to be the most difficult. Let me see if I get some light on it. So yeah, this top piece is always going to be the most difficult. Just do your best. There's not a whole lot to fold over there, but definitely try and catch, even if you have to go in a little bit on your top stitch, make sure to catch both sides of those fabrics, because if you don't, it'll look funny. You definitely want to have those hold down. And you can even see, maybe you can't see on the video, but right here there's a lot. It's like I said, it's a lot of bulk, plus the stuff's duck cloth, so it's going to be a little bit thicker anyways. So here's the two top pieces that you ended up putting together. Gonna get across there. Should be a relatively straight line still. If you followed your seam allowances, it will be. If there's something kind of wacky, then most likely it's an issue with the seam allowances. You either went over or under, and the pattern's not matching up. So we need to go along there. Try and make sure that your top stitches stay straight. We're getting back up to the top here again. You get that little bump there. My machine doesn't quite like to grab it, so I'm just going to help it out a little bit. Alright, and there we go. The top of this is a little bit messy. I didn't quite catch this like I was supposed to. And the tops didn't quite line up like they were supposed to either. So if it looks like this and this, basically this is going to be, oh, here we go. Just kidding. The two tops did end up lining up. Okay, they're a little off, but they're not terribly off. So this is the back of the cap with the round part. This is the front of the cap here. These two lines are pretty close. With them this far, like with this amount of, with this distance here, that's acceptable. Anything more than that is not going to be acceptable. But having this line meet with this line is pretty important. Otherwise, you're going to have a crooked hat. So the insides of this guy here. Yeah, that's basically how you create the 6-panel crown. So the 6-panel has the cut that goes all the way down the middle there. Yeah, overall, this one looks pretty good. Not perfect, but looks pretty good. All the top stitching is relatively consistent as far as spacing goes. This top little bulk piece really should have been tacked down a little bit closer, but yeah. So that's how you do the 6-panel cap.